It was a Sunday morning in October 1987 when the Kentucky mountains began giving up their dead. 14 men, 14 neighbors, all eliminated in a single brutal Appalachian night. But this wasn't about drugs or money or some century-old feud. This was about copper, about a stolen moonshine still, and one family's terrifying belief that when the law won't help, the mountains have their own justice. By sunrise on October 12, 1987, the quiet hollers of Harlan County, Kentucky, had become the epicenter of the worst rural mass killing in Appalachian history. State police would find bodies in trailers, in garages, scattered across 12 square miles of forest that had gone suddenly. Terribly silent, the perpetrators weren't outsiders. They were the Turners, father, 6 sons, 4 nephews. Ordinary men who'd worked the now-dead coal mines, who attended church on Sundays, who loved their families, until someone stole $15,000 worth of copper from their hidden still, until they decided that mountain law mattered more than federal statutes. The Cumberland Mountains of eastern Kentucky in 1987 were a place the rest of America had forgotten, where unemployment hovered near 40% after the mines closed, where men who'd spent their lives underground now had nothing but disability checks and fading memories of union wages. In that economic collapse, some families returned to the oldest mountain trade, moonshine, not for tradition, but survival. Daniel Turner was 54, backbent from 30 years in local seams, hands permanently stained black. He'd built his still piece by piece over 2 years, a masterpiece of copper coils and mountain ingenuity that represented his family's only future. Then, on October 9th, it vanished. Daniel Turner knew 3 families had known the still's location. He drove to Tommy Garrett's mechanic shop 2 days later. 3 witnesses heard his flat, calm ultimatum. Return what's mine by sundown tomorrow, or we settle this mountain style. That phrase, mountain style, hung in the autumn air like wood smoke. Everyone in Harlan County knew what it meant. It meant the old code, older than Kentucky law, older than America itself. When the Garretts didn't return the still by the October 11th deadline, Daniel Turner made a decision that would destroy 17 lives and haunt Appalachia for generations. For 4 days, Daniel Turner planned with the methodical precision of the Vietnam veteran he was. He borrowed hunting rifles from relatives. He bought ammunition across 4 counties to avoid suspicion. He spread Forest Service maps across his kitchen table, marking the Garrett compound with red X's, escape routes in yellow, positions for his 10 men in blue. His sons, James, Robert, Michael, David, Thomas, William, and 4 nephews became a military unit. They weren't criminals by nature. They were desperate men watching their world collapse, who believed defending their livelihood was defending their family's survival. What happens when a father asks his sons to become killers to protect their future? On the evening of October 11th, Martha Turner cooked a final family dinner. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, biscuits with honey. Nobody mentioned the rifles being cleaned in the barn. Nobody mentioned the maps in Daniel's truck. After dinner, Daniel told them, "Get some rest. Tomorrow night, we handle our business." His oldest son, James, lingered on the porch. "Dad, we could still..." "Go home," Daniel said. "Kiss your wife. Hold your kids. I'll see you tomorrow." The mountains were quiet that night. Too quiet. At 11:47 p.m., 10 vehicles gathered in a clearing 2 miles from the Garrett compound. Temperature 38 degrees. Moon a waning crescent offering almost no light. Fog rolled down from Black Mountain, turning the forest into something from a ghost story. Daniel Turner stepped from his truck, Winchester Model 70 in hands, that had delivered calves, raised barns, held his wife. He gave a hand signal learned 35 years earlier in a jungle on the other side of the world. 10 men disappeared into the fog like shadows. What followed over the next 2 hours was systematic, cold, and utterly methodical. In the mountains, some debts aren't paid in court. They're settled in blood. Tommy Garrett was first. He sat on his worn couch watching television when Daniel opened his trailer door. "You had your chance," Daniel said. The Winchester barked once. Tommy fell backward over the couch. His wife Susan screamed from the bedroom. Daniel stopped James from entering. "Women and children don't matter," he said. "That's the line." But had he already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Bobby Garrett was making a bologna sandwich in his kitchen. He begged for his 2 sleeping daughters. Daniel gave him 30 seconds to say goodbye through a closed bedroom door. When Bobby emerged, tears on his face, he said, "They're babies, Daniel. You make them orphans." Daniel's rifle cut him off. The refrigerator hummed. From the bedroom, a little girl began crying. The killings unfolded with dreadful efficiency. Wayne Garrett, 26, father of an 8-month-old girl, eliminated in his garage while Hank Williams played on a portable radio. Carl Garrett, Vietnam veteran like Daniel, asked from his couch, "You really going to do this over copper?" Robert Turner answered with a shotgun blast. 19-year-old Marcus Garrett, running barefoot through fog in his boxer shorts, caught at the tree line. "I'm just a kid," he pleaded. Samuel Turner, 24, looked down. "You're a Garrett." His rifle spoke once. But the final confrontation happened in Tommy Garrett's mechanic garage. Raymond, Douglas, and Frank Garrett Jr. had taken cover behind a Chevy truck, 2 rifles, 1 shotgun between them. "You killed enough people tonight," Raymond shouted. "I just leave." Daniel stepped into the garage, 9 Turners surrounding the building. "Can't do that, Raymond." For a moment, 2 men who'd lived in the same county their whole lives faced each other over gun barrels. "Hell of a thing," Raymond said. "Dying over copper." "It was never about the copper," Daniel answered. "It was about you looking at me like I was nothing." They fired simultaneously. The garage erupted in muzzle flashes. When the echoes faded, 3 more men lay on oil-stained concrete. At 1:38 a.m., it was over. 14 men dead. Daniel Turner sat in his truck, at hands shaking uncontrollably. He looked at his palms, stained with gunpowder and something darker. These hands had built fences, changed diapers, held his wife. Now they were a killer's hands. "Dad?" James asked from the passenger seat, voice hollow. "What do we do now?" Daniel stared at the dark forest where dawn would break in a few hours. "We go home. We clean up. We wait for them to come." How do you go home after becoming something you never imagined you could be? 6 hours later, Kentucky State Trooper Gary Henderson found the first body. By noon, the FBI had turned the Garrett compound into a command center. Evidence markers everywhere. 14 bodies, 73 shell casings, at least 8 different weapons, all hunting rifles, all legally owned. Agent Raymond Cross studied the scene. "This wasn't a killing," he told Sheriff Randall Pierce. "This was warfare, small unit tactics. Someone planned this like a military operation." The motive emerged from a coffee can under Daniel Turner's sink. Receipts for ammunition, a handwritten note. "They stole my still, $15,000. Took my family's livelihood, gave them fair warning. They chose this." Agent Cross held the note, disbelief washing over him. 14 lives over a moonshine still. Sheriff Pierce, who'd known both families for decades, said quietly, "It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. About mountain code. You don't steal from a man's family and walk away." But where does defense end and massacre begin? The community fractured instantly. At Betty's restaurant, some called Daniel Turner a monster. Others understood his desperation. Earl Hopkins, who owned the hardware store, told the reporter, "I ain't saying what he did was right, but I understand it. Man works his whole life, economy collapses, and someone steals the one thing keeping his family fed. Something's going to break." The uncomfortable truth whispered through Harlan County. Most people were closer to Daniel's breaking point than they wanted to admit. On October 18th, FBI agents and state police approached the Turner property. They found Daniel sitting on his front porch, unarmed, hands visible. His 6 sons and 4 nephews stood behind him, all calm, waiting. "Figured you'd be coming," Daniel said. They filed out one by one. No resistance, no weapons. As Sheriff Pierce handcuffed Daniel, he asked the question burning in everyone's mind. "Was it worth it, Daniel?" Daniel looked at his land, his mountains, his home. "Want to ask me when I'm dying in prison," he said. "Then I'll tell you." The trial moved to Lexington. 140 combined charges of first-degree murder. The defense argued extreme emotional disturbance, Appalachian honor culture, economic desperation. The prosecution destroyed it in 2 hours. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated mass murder dressed up as mountain justice. The jury deliberated 19 hours, guilty. All 10 defendants, Daniel Turner, life without parole. His sons, 25 to 40 years each. When given a chance to speak, Daniel said only, "I protected my family, no regrets." Daniel Turner served 37 years in federal prison. He worked in the library, taught inmates to read, was remembered as peaceful by guards, the dark irony not lost on anyone. Martha visited every Sunday for 19 years until dementia took her. She died believing it was still October 10th, 1987, waiting for Daniel to come home from checking the still. Daniel died in the prison infirmary at 92. His last words, "Tell my boys, I'm sorry. Not for what we did, for what it cost them." The aftermath rippled through generations. James Turner, released after 25 years, lives alone, never married, haunted by nightmares. William Turner, 19 when it happened, walked into the forest near Black Mountain in 2014 and never returned. The Garrett widows and children scattered, carrying scars that never healed. The Turner homestead collapsed. The Garrett compound was bulldozed. Today, nothing grows quite right in that clearing. Locals say the soil's too acidic. These others whisper violence leaves marks the earth can't forget. So what remains? Not justice, not as society defines it. A father who loved his family more than his own freedom. 14 neighbors who made one catastrophic decision. A system that failed at every level. Abandoned economy, underfunded law enforcement. A culture where asking for help was weakness. Daniel Turner crossed a boundary no human should cross. But that boundary existed in a world where a man's livelihood could vanish overnight and the law was 40 miles away. Violence doesn't restore what was stolen. It only creates new loss. This story forces uncomfortable questions. What would you do if someone stole your family's survival and authorities couldn't help? Where's the line between protecting what's yours and becoming what you fear most? Or does extreme desperation erase moral boundaries? Because these stories aren't just history. They're happening right now in forgotten counties where systems fail and ordinary people make choices they can never take back. If this exploration of justice, desperation, and the price of honor made you think, support our channel, hit the like button and subscribe to Add the Real Underworld -12 for more true stories that challenge everything we think we know about right and wrong. The monsters we fear aren't always born. Sometimes they're made. One stolen still, one refused warning, one desperate October night at a time. To truly understand the Turner Massacre, we must dive deeper into the world that created it. Harlan County in the 1980s wasn't just poor, it was post-apocalyptic. The coal industry hadn't just declined, it had abandoned entire communities. Company houses stood empty, schools consolidated until they closed, and the only growth industry was despair. Daniel Turner wasn't an anomaly, he was a product of this environment. His military service in Vietnam had taught him discipline and tactics, but it had also taught him that institutions could fail you. When he returned to Kentucky in the early 1970s, he found a different kind of war, one against economic entropy. The still represented more than income, it was autonomy in a world stripping men of their dignity. Every copper coil he soldered was a middle finger to a system that had discarded him. This psychological context is crucial. The Garretts weren't just stealing equipment, they were attacking the last vestige of control Daniel Turner had over his family's destiny. As the planning phase reveals the terrifying normalcy of the operation, Daniel didn't acquire illegal weapons. He borrowed hunting rifles from family. He didn't hire mercenaries. He recruited nephews who'd grown up calling him Uncle Danny. The ammunition receipts found in that coffee can told a story of methodical preparations spread across weeks, not days. He bought .306 rounds in Harlan, 12-gauge shells in Cumberland, .357 Magnum cartridges in Middlesboro. Each purchase was legal, each transaction documented. This wasn't the frenzied stockpiling of a madman, but the calculated procurement of a man executing a business plan, albeit the darkest business imaginable. The topographic maps with their colored markings showed understanding of terrain, choke points, and escape routes. Daniel wasn't just avenging a theft. He was conducting a military operation against what he perceived as an invading force. The Garrett compound wasn't a home to him in those planning sessions. It was an objective. The psychological toll on the Turner sons during that planning week cannot be overstated. James, the eldest at 32, had a wife and 2 young children. Robert had just started courting a girl from Pineville. William, the baby at 19, still had army recruitment pamphlets on his dresser. Each faced an impossible choice: defy their father and patriarch or participate in something that would irrevocably shatter their futures. Appalachian family dynamics are hierarchical and absolute. A father's request isn't a suggestion, it's law. The silence around the dinner table that final night wasn't agreement. That it was the heavy quiet of men who've surrendered agency to a collective fate. Martha Turner's cooking that meal, the fried chicken, the biscuits, wasn't just feeding her family, it was performing normalcy one last time. She knew what was coming. Every woman in those mountains knew the sound that followed, mountain style. The investigation that followed revealed startling details about the killing's precision. Ballistics showed that most shots were fired from distances of 20 to 50 yards. Close enough for identification, far enough for tactical advantage. The absence of defensive wounds on most Garrett men suggested they were taken by surprise, many in their sleep. The FBI's psychological profile noted the clinical detachment of the crime scenes. Personal items weren't disturbed, wallets weren't taken, and as Daniel had ordered, when the women and children were left unharmed, traumatized, but alive. This selective violence baffled investigators. It suggested a moral code operating within the immoral act. Agent Cross would later write in his notes, perpetrators didn't see themselves as murderers, but as justices administering capital punishment for a capital crime, theft of livelihood. This distinction, however legally meaningless, was culturally significant. The community's schism reflected Appalachia's eternal conflict between two justice systems, the law of the land versus the law of the mountains. Older residents, those who remembered feuds and isolations, tended toward understanding if not condoning. Younger residents, those with TV connections to the outside world, viewed it as barbaric. The Garrett funerals drew hundreds, and the Turner arraignments drew crowds of equal size but divided sentiment. At the county courthouse, men who'd worked alongside both families stood in uneasy silence, knowing that economic desperation had brought them all closer to this brink than they cared to admit. The local newspaper editorial asked, "When the state abandons you, who becomes the state?" It was a question without a good answer, only blood stains and prison sentences. The long-term consequences transformed Harlan County's social fabric. A generation of children grew up with the Turner Massacre as local folklore, a cautionary tale told to warn against both theft and vengeance. Property disputes dropped dramatically in the years following, as neighbors chose mediation over confrontation, terrified of sparking another Turner Garrett. The event became a referendum on self-reliance gone pathological. Economic development initiatives stumbled. Outside investors saw the county as volatile. The very isolation that had protected moonshining for generations now prevented healing. Daniel Turner, in seeking to protect his family's future, had inadvertently poisoned the soil for every family's future in those hills. The mountains remembered, and they made everyone pay. Ultimately, the Turner Massacre asks us to examine the architecture of justice itself. When formal institutions are distant, underfunded, or indifferent, what fills that vacuum? For Daniel Turner, it was a code older than the nation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a still for 14 lives. His tragedy lies in the catastrophic miscalculation of exchange rates. He traded his freedom, his son's futures, and his community's peace for a principle that, in the cold light of a courtroom, held no legal weight. Yet in the shadowy hollows of the Cumberland Mountains, it held the only weight that mattered: respect. The final haunting lesson isn't about right or wrong, it's about cause and effect. Systems that fail their people don't just create poverty, they create monsters. And sometimes those monsters look exactly like us. Our neighbors, our fathers, our brothers, pushed one step too far across a line that shouldn't exist, but does. Thank you for listening to this deep exploration of one of Appalachia's darkest chapters. Remember to like, subscribe, and join us next time on The Real Underworld.